I'm not sure if you feel it, but I definitely feel it myself. It seems like despair is in the air. It seems like something is going on and something is wrong. It just doesn't feel right. And not only that, but there's this numb feeling. I hate to say it, so numb that it's a bit confusing. It's definitely unusual. If we are feeling, and I'm sure many of us, if not all of us, are feeling some type of despair and numbness at this time, if we are feeling it, it's normal that we are. Why are we feeling this? The answer is obvious. Just look at what has happened the past year almost. It's almost been a year since this pandemic started, and everything else with it. It's not only the pandemic, but everything else that happened around it. It almost seems like this year, this past year of 2020, has been unique in many ways. And as I said, not only the pandemic, but everything else that has happened around it. I know for me and my family and my parish, I could say the same thing. What do we do? What do we do in despair or when this numbness comes as Orthodox Christians? Let's first of all acknowledge the fact that these type of situations come upon us in our lifetime many times. Some people are more fortunate that it comes very few times. Other people are not as fortunate and it comes upon them many more times. Now, the good thing about what's happening to us now in this pandemic and everything else around it is the fact that we're all in it. Where in the past, many times we almost could not understand, comprehend those who were in despair. I know, for me, it's much easier than everyone else because I see this all the time as a priest, as a pastor, but my kids don't. I try to keep them away from it. I'm sure other parents do the same thing. And aside from doctors, nurses, emergency personnel, priests, pastors, this is not experienced. So now that we're all in it, we will definitely have a lot more compassion for those who go through it on regular basis. So that's a good thing. Now, what do we do? It's kind of simple, but complex at the same time. You see, people who are in despair and distress and things of this nature, and who are in the secular world, and sometimes people who are also practicing Orthodox Christians, they go and they visit psychologists, counselors, psychiatrists. Sometimes people use certain type of drugs or alcohol and things of that nature. And as far as the psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors are concerned, I do have to say that sometimes that's necessary and needed. And that definitely, one should not be ashamed of that. I know I wouldn't be because they are doctors like others. Obviously, these people need to be professionals and licensed, and these people need to be the people we trust or the people who are recommended by certain either family members or friends or so on and so forth. But that's what people in the secular world and some people also from the church do because there is no other way to come out of this despair, because despair is not an easy thing to come out of, and the feeling is horrible. It's almost depressing, oppressing. There's almost no, how can I say that we almost lose the sense of wanting to live and wanting to exist, which is a horrible feeling. And it does come upon us, and as I said, it's okay. Now it's important to go back to having the love for life and being in a more normal and God desiring and our desire too way of life. Now, let me just remind all of us what the Christians were called the first 2-3 centuries, I think. They weren't called Christians. They were called the joyous ones. Now, you would think, well, it's easy to be joyous. You love Jesus, and Jesus loves you, and Jesus is great, and being a Christian is great, and a follower of Christ is great. Yes, that's absolutely true. However, keep in mind that at that time, while they were being called the joyous ones, because people saw them, they were full of joy at all time. They had the love for life that was unbelievable. People who weren't Christians call them that. Keep in mind that for 300 years, in fact, for 313 years, Christians were persecuted. Now, I'm not saying persecuted like we may be persecuted now or in the future when someone doesn't give us a non-for-profit status, or someone puts us down or looks at us bad or doesn't like us or talks bad about us. No. Much more serious than that. Christians were persecuted big time. They were killed left and right. They were tortured before being killed. Their bodies were left on streets to rot and present an example to others. That's why the first Christians had to do underground services, and they did services. They didn't have churches. They had little bitty homes that they would gather in, and then they would kind of go away. But after a while, it became obvious in smaller towns who these people were. And that's why they were seen and kind of obvious, because they were constantly joyous regardless of what was happening to them. Now, if we were, God forbid, tortured and our life was at stake any moment for being a Christian, that would be serious despair. But it wasn't for them, and the question is why? Why is it that they were not in despair? Why is it that living under those circumstances, which we cannot compare to having gone through a few months of a virus, yes, deadly, but and the economy may be bad and all these other things may be bad, but that can't compare to losing your life at any given moment in time, and not only losing it, but being tortured and your family being tortured. Why is it that they were called the joyous ones? I'll tell you why. Because at the same time, while living here and now, they were also part of another reality. And that other reality is the reality of the kingdom of heaven, which they experienced here and now through the divine liturgy. But not only did they experience it through the divine liturgy, but they also felt it every day of their life. They were here with their body and soul, but with their heart and mind, they were already in the kingdom of heaven. And imagine yourself being in the kingdom of heaven is a joyous event. Looking at things from the perspective of the kingdom of heaven. Looking from this perspective, you know, we may look at death comes so that we can go to heaven. But looking at it from the other perspective, we see being immersed in God's love. We see being with our loved ones. We see never suffering again. We see living eternally. We see not being tempted. We see not being in pain. We see not seeing others be in pain. And on and on and on and on. When you look at it from the perspective of the kingdom of heaven, you cannot but be joyous. It's almost like, you know, I'm hoping that my wife and I will be going to see family at a warmer place. We'll be going, let's say, on a little vacation soon. And already, even though it has not come there, we're counting down the days of going to vacation. And this happens every time we go on vacation. We count down the days to go on vacation. And this helps us now. By looking at the vacation, and how it's going to be. We're going to rest. It's going to be a warmer climate, and we're going to be with family, whom we haven't seen for a few months or a year. Already feels good. Well, in the same way we look at, as Christians, the kingdom of heaven. The only difference is, and the big difference is, that going on vacation, whether in our mind or physically, in our mind, going on vacation feels good, but the reality of the situation is, a lot of times when we go on these vacations, we come back from them more tired than we were when we went there. Now, I must say, it still feels good to get away. It still feels good to rest, to do nothing, and so on and so forth. It especially feels good planning for it, because that gives us the joy now. In other words, you know, all of this suffering and toughness and roughness, if you will, is worth it, because in 2-3 weeks, I'll be in Georgia, I'll be in Florida, I'll be in Hawaii, or wherever. I'll be with family in Cincinnati, or whatever the case is. So the big difference is, obviously, kingdom of heaven is much more real, much more satisfactory. And one day when we go to the kingdom of heaven, we will never come back from it, and we will never be tired in it. We will never be depressed in it, and so on and so forth. So if we live our life looking forward to the kingdom of heaven, looking at things from that perspective and towards the kingdom of heaven, then everything else will be much easier in life. One of our elders, Tadeas of Vitovnica, he said something which many of the psychologists in Serbia have used now for years. Now, let me remind you, this elder Tadeas, he himself, before he went to the monastery, suffered 2 nervous breakdowns because of despair and distress and everything else. But then decided, you know, I'm done with this. I'm going to focus on the kingdom of heaven, so much so that I'm going to go to the monastery. I'm not suggesting that you go to the monastery. Your monastery can be in your own home. But in any case, he went there. He started focusing on the kingdom of heaven and became one of the most holiest people in the 20th century in Serbia. And not only that, but books were written in conversations with him, quoted by many of the psychologists. He said, kakve su ti misli, takav ti je život. Your thoughts determine your actions. It's a rough translation. What actually he was saying is, in a sense, your state of mind determines how things are going to be for you. Your state of mind. And if your state of mind is in the kingdom of heaven already, if that's your goal, if your goal is not based on earthly things, because if it's based only on earthly things go away. Earthly things disappoint. I mean, sometimes people come and they say, well, so-and-so disappointed me. I had, so much hope, so much trust and whatever. People of God, everyone except Christ can disappoint you. Everyone. I can disappoint you and may disappoint you. The bishop, the patriarch, your spiritual father, your parents, your grandparents, everyone except Christ will disappoint you, because we're all weak. We're all messed up. Christ is the only perfect one who will never disappoint. That's why we focus on him. That's why we focus on the kingdom that he opened up for us, so that our state of mind, if our state of mind is in such, then this numbness, this despair will literally go away. And as I said, the good thing about this happening now is because we're all in it. The whole world's in it. So it's not like a few, which we used to look at, like or dislike in our community, because they're in despair. Maybe we wouldn't understand them, and now we're all in it. And the good thing about being all in it is that because if we approach this correctly, we can't carry someone else's cross. Everyone has their own cross that he has to bear and carry. But we could certainly support the weight of our brother and our sister. And this is very crucial. I've noticed this recently, even with myself, dealing within the parish and within my own family. Our fuse is kind of short these days. Why? Naturally and normally, because we're distressed. We're oppressed. Many things are happening. These are normal things. When things like this happen, when they hit you, of course you're going to be numb. Well, none of us expected this to happen this year, but it did. So what? It did. Now we look at it, we grasp it, and we deal with it, and we overcome it. We don't simply stay in that despair. And the good thing, as I said, about all of us being in it is that we could help each other. And that's why when we're dealing with each other, especially these days, and especially this upcoming year, having been hit by all of this year, we need to be very diligent one with another. I exchanged messages with one of the people from church just the other day, and I sent a very simple message. And then I got this message that was kind of rough, almost offensive, And then I wanted to respond quickly, but then I stopped myself. I said, well, wait a minute. Maybe so-and-so is having a rough day today. So then I chose my words wisely, very, very wisely, very, very diligently. And I sent it to this person. And then the person was a little less rough back to me. And then I responded even something more light and diligent and with caution, great caution, with love, trying to put love in it and not judgment and more stress on the other person who already is dealing with it. And then the following day, the person saw me in person and said, Father, please forgive me. It was just one of those days. I said, I know. I had one just the other day, and I'm just thankful that no one called me, no one communicated with me. But I would hope if I did communicate with someone and I offended them, that they would know how to respond, because we're in a unique situation. So people of God, no distress, no despair, no oppression, no depression. Our state of mind has to be in the kingdom of heaven, and we can experience kingdom of heaven, those of us who are in the Orthodox Church, here and now, through the divine liturgy. And yes, I know there are restrictions. I'm aware of that. Everyone's aware of that. But there's always a way. If there's a will, there's a way. We have services during divine liturgy. You can even call me and say, can you serve divine liturgy Wednesday? My family wants to come. Just my family. Just so we can experience the divine liturgy. Or even partake of it through Facebook Live, as I'm doing now. I know that's different, and we shouldn't get used to it, and I know it's not the same. I'm aware of that. But if there is no other way, we could still have that connection. The Lord will do something awesome for us if we make an effort. As long as we promise that soon as this is over, in our hearts and in our minds, we're going to be there. And we're going to make an effort from now on to focus more on the kingdom of heaven, which will give us joy, rather than focusing only on this world, which will put us in despair. And no one wants that. No one wants that numbness. I don't want it. I felt it. I'm still feeling it, kind of, but I'm fighting it because I know better. And you know better too.